He was a truck driver from Tupelo. He sold 1 billion records. He never wrote a single song, and he changed the world. More than 40 years after his death, we still can't agree on what Elvis Presley really was. Was he a king or a thief? A rebel or a product? A god or just a guy who got lucky? We know who he influenced. John Lennon said before Elvis, there was nothing. Bruce Springsteen saw him on TV and saw the future. Bob Dylan, David Bowie, Freddie Mercury. The list is endless. But knowing who he influenced is the easy part. The real questions, the ones that stick around, are about the how and the why. The parts of the story that don't quite add up. His influence is like a ghost in the machine of popular music. You can feel it everywhere, but you can't always see it. It's in the swagger of a lead singer, the sneer of a punk, the spectacle of a pop show. But what if the biggest parts of his legacy are the ones we've misunderstood? What if his failures were more influential than his successes? What if his death was the most powerful career move he ever made? We think we have the story straight. But the truth is, when it comes to Elvis's real impact, we're still just chasing shadows. As number 15 is Elvis's greatest influence happening after his death. Elvis Presley died on August 16th, 1977. But his career didn't end. In many ways, it was just getting started. The immediate aftermath was chaos. His estate, left to his daughter Lisa Marie, was worth a few $1,000,000 but was losing money fast. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, still held massive control and sold off the rights to Elvis's pre-1973 recordings to RCA for a shockingly low sum. It looked like the end. A tragic fade-out for a cultural icon, but what happened next created a blueprint for every celebrity legacy to come. Priscilla Presley took control of the estate in the early 1980s. She transformed Graceland from a private home into a public museum, opening it in 1982. It was a huge risk. Many thought it was tacky, but it worked. It became a pilgrimage site, a shrine. It started generating millions. This was the first step. The estate, under the guidance of CEO Jack Soden, began to meticulously manage Elvis's image. They weren't just selling old records. They were curating a legend. They controlled which photos could be used, which songs could be licensed. They turned Elvis from a deceased singer into a global brand. The real shift happened in 2002. A Dutch DJ named Junkie the 40th remixed the 1968 song, A Little Less Conversation. The new version, Elvis vs. JXL, was a smash hit. It went to number 1 in over 20 countries. Suddenly, Elvis wasn't just a nostalgia act. He was on the radio, in the clubs, back in the charts. He was competing with current artists. This opened the floodgates. It showed that Elvis's music wasn't a museum piece. It could be updated, reinterpreted, and made relevant for a new generation. This posthumous collaboration model has been copied endlessly, with artists like Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, and Tupac Shakur having their work remixed and released long after their deaths. But Elvis's estate did it first and did it biggest. Then came the new media. Cirque du Soleil created Viva Elvis in Las Vegas, a massive theatrical production. Films and documentaries were made with the estate's blessing, like the 2022 Baz Luhrmann biopic Elvis. The film wasn't just a movie, it was a strategic reintroduction of the Elvis brand to Gen Z, and it worked. It sparked a massive resurgence in his music streaming numbers. Young people who only knew him as a caricature in a jumpsuit were suddenly listening to his Sun Sessions recordings. His estate proved that a legacy isn't just something you protect, it's something you actively build and sell. This is where the real mystery lies. The influence of the living Elvis on other musicians is well documented. But the influence of the dead Elvis, of the corporate entity known as Elvis Presley Enterprises, might be even greater. They created the playbook for posthumous stardom. How do you manage the image of a dead artist? How do you monetize their catalog without cheapening it? How do you introduce them to new audiences who have no memory of them being alive? The estates of Michael Jackson, Prince, David Bowie, and Amy Winehouse all face these questions. And the answer, almost always, can be traced back to the strategies pioneered at Graceland. They showed the world that an artist's death doesn't have to be the end of their commercial or cultural power. In fact, it can be a new beginning. So what are the things we still don't know? How many artists' estates have a literal Graceland model in their business plan? Did the success of the A Little Less Conversation remix create a dangerous precedent, encouraging the endless recycling of old art instead of the creation of new art. And the most unsettling question of all, is it possible that Elvis Presley is more powerful, more famous, and more influential today, precisely because he is no longer alive to complicate the brand? Number 14, did the fat Elvis in Vegas accidentally invent the modern pop spectacle? When people think of Elvis in the 1970s, they usually picture the jumpsuit, the karate moves, the weight gain, the Las Vegas residency at the International Hotel, later the Las Vegas Hilton. It's often seen as the tragic final act, the moment the rock and roll rebel became a self-parody. The music became bombastic, drowned in orchestras and backup singers. He was a corporate entertainer, a shadow of his former self. That's the standard story. But what if it's completely wrong? What if in that gaudy Vegas showroom, Elvis was accidentally creating the future of live music? Let's look at the context of 1969. The big rock shows were happening at festivals like Woodstock or in sweaty arenas. The production was minimal. It was about the band, the amps, and the audience. Big, expensive stage shows were for Broadway or old-school crooners like Frank Sinatra. Rock and roll was supposed to be raw and authentic. Elvis's Vegas show was the opposite of that. He had a full orchestra, multiple sets of backup singers, an elaborate stage, and custom-designed costumes that cost a fortune. It was a spectacle. He wasn't just performing songs, he was putting on a production. The scale of it was unprecedented for a rock artist. His first engagement in July 1969 broke all attendance records in Las Vegas history. He performed 2 shows a night, 7 nights a week, for a month straight. And he kept doing this for years, performing over 600 shows. This wasn't a tour, it was a residency. The idea of a major pop or rock artist planting themselves in one city for an extended high production run was not a common concept. Now, it's the standard business model for superstars. Think of Lady Gaga's Enigma show, or Britney Spears' Piece of Me. Think of U2's recent run at the Sphere in Las Vegas. These are massive, technologically advanced productions built for a single venue. They are direct descendants of what Elvis started at the International Hotel. He also redefined the relationship between the artist and the audience in a large venue. He handed out scarves soaked in sweat. He created a sense of intimacy and connection despite the massive scale of the show. This blend of personal touch and epic production is a hallmark of modern pop concerts. Where a star like Taylor Swift might play to 80,000 people, but she still tries to create moments that feel personal and direct. Elvis was a master of this. He made a huge hotel showroom feel like a small club. The critics at the time, especially rock critics like those from Rolling Stone magazine, often dismissed the Vegas years. They saw it as a sellout, but the audiences didn't, and other musicians were watching. Artists like Elton John and Freddie Mercury clearly took notes on the showmanship, the costumes, and the theatricality. They understood that rock music could be more than just 3 chords and a t-shirt. It could be a spectacle. The book Elvis in Vegas, How the King Reinvented the Las Vegas Show by Richard Zoglin argues this point directly, claiming Elvis created the modern Vegas show. So while the image of Vegas Elvis is often used as a punchline, the reality is far more complex. He took the energy of rock and roll and merged it with the production values of a Broadway show. He created a new kind of live entertainment. He proved that a rock star could be a polished professional theatrical performer without losing their core audience. In fact, he found a whole new one, but the questions remain. Did Elvis's residency model trap artists, turning them into highly paid employees of corporations and hotels? By creating the pop spectacle, did he inadvertently kill the raw, unpredictable danger of early rock and roll shows? And here's the biggest unknown. When today's pop stars plan their multi-million-dollar Vegas residencies, do they have any idea that the entire concept was invented by a man they probably only know from a fuzzy image on a kitsch souvenir? Number 13, was Elvis a musical thief or the world's first great synthesizer? This is the biggest, most controversial question about Elvis, and it hangs over his entire legacy. The charge is simple. Elvis Presley, a white man, got rich and famous by stealing the music of black artists. He took rhythm and blues, a genre created by black musicians who were denied mainstream airplay, and he made it palatable for white audiences. He was the acceptable face of a dangerous new sound, and he reaped the rewards that the originators never saw. There is a lot of truth in this argument. Look at the evidence. One of his first big hits was Hound Dog. The definitive version for many is Elvis's 1956 rock and roll explosion, but it was originally recorded in 1952 by a black woman, Big Mama Thornton. Her version is slower, grittier, a pure blues powerhouse. She reportedly saw very little money from the song's massive success with Elvis. The same goes for That's All Right, his first single from 1954. It was a cover of a song by bluesman Arthur, Big Boy Crudup. Crudup died in poverty, fighting for royalties he never received. The story repeats over and over. Mystery Train was from Junior Parker. Good Rockin' Tonight was from Roy Brown. Prominent figures have leveled the charge of theft. Ray Charles was famously critical, stating that Elvis was just imitating black singers. In the late 1980s, the hip-hop group Public Enemy famously rapped Elvis was a hero to most, but he never meant shit to me. Straight up racist that sucker was, simple and plain in their song, Fight the Power. For many, Elvis is the ultimate symbol of cultural appropriation, a story of white privilege profiting from black innovation. And this view is critically important. It's a lens through which his entire career must be viewed. But there's another side to the story. It's more complicated. Elvis never claimed to have invented rock and roll. He was always open about his influences. He would talk about listening to black radio stations in Memphis. He would credit artists like Crudup and B.B. King. In fact, many of the black musicians he admired defended him. B.B. King, a friend of Elvis's from the Memphis scene, always said that Elvis did a lot to open doors for black artists by introducing their music to a wider audience. James Brown, the godfather of soul, called Elvis a brother and deeply respected him. Jackie Wilson, a dynamic performer in his own right, was a mutual admirer. The argument here is that Elvis wasn't a thief, but a synthesizer. He grew up poor in Tupelo and Memphis, in neighborhoods where the lines between black and white culture were blurred, especially in music. He was exposed to blues, gospel, country, and pop. What he did at Sun Records, under the guidance of producer Sam Phillips, was to fuse these elements into something new. He sang a blues song with a country rhythm. He sang a country song with a gospel fervor. He wasn't just copying, he was interpreting. He was filtering all these American musical forms through his own unique voice and sensibility. Sam Phillips was famously looking for a white man who had the Negro sound and the Negro feel. He found it in Elvis. This act of fusion is what many people call the birth of rock and roll. It's music historian Peter Guralnick, in his definitive 2-volume biography of Elvis, Last Train to Memphis and Careless Love, paints a picture of a young man genuinely and deeply in love with the music he was hearing. He wasn't a calculated businessman trying to exploit a market. He was a fan who happened to have an incredible once-in-a-generation talent. So, which is it? Was he an exploiter or an evangelist? A thief or an alchemist? The mystery isn't about what he did. The facts are clear. He recorded songs written and first performed by black artists. The mystery is about his intent and his ultimate effect. Did his success, as B.B. King suggested, ultimately help black artists by creating a massive new market for rhythm and blues? White artists would forever be more commercially successful with black art forms. When a modern artist like Post Malone or Justin Bieber incorporates hip-hop and R&B into their music, are they following the Elvis model of synthesis or the Elvis model of appropriation? And perhaps the most difficult question of all, is it possible for him to be both a sincere lover of black music and the greatest beneficiary of a racist system all at the same time? Number 12. Did Elvis teach the world to sing with emotion or just how to snarl? Before Elvis, how did a male pop singer sound? Think of Bing Crosby, Perry Como, or Frank Sinatra. Their voices were smooth, controlled, and professional. The delivery was polished. The emotion was present, but it was refined. It was kept at a safe distance. They were singing at you. Then came Elvis. He sounded completely different. He wasn't always on perfect pitch. His voice would crack, catch, and break. He would go from a deep baritone to a soaring falsetto in the same line. He would stutter, hiccup, and growl. He was singing from inside the song. This vocal style was a revelation. It was incredibly emotional and, for the time, deeply sexual. That famous sneer wasn't just on his lips, you could hear it in his voice. In a song like Heartbreak Hotel, you can hear the loneliness. In Jailhouse Rock, you can hear the raw, chaotic energy. He wasn't just performing the lyrics. He was inhabiting them. This was a new way of singing for a mainstream white audience. He brought the raw, emotional delivery of blues and gospel singers into the heart of pop music. Countless singers who came after him adopted this approach. John Lennon's raw screams on songs like Twist and Shout owe a huge debt to Elvis's vocal abandon. Robert Plant of Led Zeppelin built his entire vocal persona on a foundation of Elvis-style moans, whoops, and emotional intensity. Even country singers who had their own traditions started singing with a new kind of emotional directness after Elvis. George Jones, often called the greatest country singer, had a voice that could break with emotion, a style that ran parallel to Elvis's. But here's the mystery. Did Elvis create a new language of vocal emotion, or did he just create a collection of tics and mannerisms that other singers copied? For every Robert Plant who took the emotional core of Elvis's style and made it his own, there are thousands of singers who just copied the surface details. The lip curl, the the dramatic vibrato. It became a kind of vocal costume. You can see this in the countless Elvis impersonators, but you can also see it in mainstream singers who use those same tricks to signal authenticity or rock and roll attitude. The music critic Greil Marcus wrote about this in his book Mystery Train Images of America and Rock and Roll Music. He argues that Elvis's best recordings have a depth and complexity that transcends mere style. But he also acknowledges that the style itself became a commodity. It could be copied and pasted. So Elvis's influence is twofold. He showed singers how to be vulnerable and emotionally naked in a song. But he also gave them a set of easy-to-imitate moves that could be used without any of the underlying feeling. This created a permanent split in popular singing. There are singers who chase the emotional truth that Elvis found in his best moments. And think of Jeff Buckley's soaring, vulnerable vocals or the raw power of a singer like Janis Joplin. And then there are singers who are essentially performing a caricature of a rock singer, using the snarls and the growls as a kind of shorthand. So what do we not know? When a modern singer uses a vocal fry or a sudden falsetto, are they tapping into the deep well of emotional expression that Elvis opened, or are they just using a cheap trick he popularized? Did Elvis's vocal style ultimately create more authentic singers, or did it just create better fakes? And the biggest question is the very sound of a rock and roll voice today, just one long, distorted echo of Elvis Presley. Number 11 is the 68 Comeback Special, the secret template for every rock star reinvention. By 1968, Elvis was in trouble. His career was in a ditch. He hadn't had a #1 hit in years. He hadn't performed live since 1961. He was stuck in Hollywood making a series of terrible formulaic movies with terrible formulaic soundtracks. To the new generation of music fans, listening to the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Bob Dylan, Elvis was a joke. He was irrelevant, a relic from the 1950s. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, booked him a TV Christmas special on NBC. The Colonel wanted a standard, family-friendly holiday show. Elvis in a tuxedo singing Silent Night. It would have been the final nail in his coffin. But Elvis, for one of the few times in his career, rebelled. Guided by a young, ambitious director named Steve Binder, he threw out the Colonel's plan. Instead of a cheesy Christmas show, he created a raw, powerful, and electrifying television event that redefined his career and arguably the entire concept of a comeback. The official title was Singer Presents Elvis, but it's now universally known as the 68 Comeback Special. The show had two main parts. The first was a series of big, choreographed production numbers. But the heart of the special was the informal, unplugged segment. Elvis, on a tiny stage surrounded by an audience, reunited with his original guitarist Scotty Moore and drummer DJ Fontana. He was dressed head to toe in black leather. He was lean, dangerous, and funny. He snarled his way through his old hits like Heartbreak Hotel and Jailhouse Rock. It wasn't nostalgia. It was a reclamation. He was reminding the world who he was. He was taking his legacy back. The show ended with him performing a brand new song, If I Can Dream, a passionate plea for peace and understanding written in the wake of Martin Luther King Jr. It was the highest rated show of the week. The soundtrack album was a hit. It completely revitalized his career. It led directly to his return to Memphis to record the classic From Elvis in Memphis album and his triumphant return to live performing in Las Vegas the following year. It was the single most important event of his later career, but its influence extends far beyond Elvis. The 68 Comeback Special created a template. An artist is past their prime. They are considered irrelevant. They stage a major, high-profile event, a TV special, a concert, an album that strips away the recent failures and reminds everyone of their core greatness. It's a strategic act of public relations and artistic renewal. Think about it. When MTV launched its Unplugged series in the 1990s, where rock bands played acoustic sets, what was the visual and musical blueprint? It was Elvis in black leather on that tiny stage. When Johnny Cash, forgotten by the Nashville establishment, teamed up with producer Rick Rubin for his American recording series, what was he doing? He was stripping his music down to its raw emotional core, just like Elvis did. When artists from U2 to Madonna to Lady Gaga have felt their careers flagging, they've often responded with a bold, back to basic statement designed to recapture their original fire. It's the comeback special playbook. The mystery is how conscious this influence is. Is it a direct, deliberate imitation, or is it that the '68 special was so powerful that it simply became part of the collective unconscious of popular music? It defined what a comeback looks like, it set the narrative. So the questions that linger are these: how many career-reviving unplugged sessions or back to basics albums were secretly inspired by watching Elvis in that black leather suit? Did Steve Binder and Elvis create the single most durable and effective public relations strategy in music history by accident? And is it possible that without that 1 hour of television in 1968, the entire concept of the legacy artist making a triumphant return simply wouldn't exist as we know it today? Number 10. Were the Rolling Stones just the Elvis the world wasn't ready for in 1956? In the early 1960s, the music industry created a simple narrative for the two biggest bands in the world. The Beatles were the good boys, they wore suits, they were charming, and they wrote pop songs about holding hands. The Rolling Stones were the bad boys, they were scruffy, they sneered, and they sang about sexual frustration and street fighting. It was a brilliant marketing strategy, but it hides a more interesting musical truth. The Rolling Stones weren't the opposite of the Beatles, they were the dark, twisted reflection of early Elvis Presley. Think about the Elvis of 1956. To mainstream adult society, he was not a charming pop star. He was a menace. His swiveling hips were seen as vulgar and obscene. He was called Elvis the Pelvis. He was condemned from church pulpits. His performances on television were censored, with cameras showing him only from the waist up. He represented a new kind of youthful rebellion. He was raw, sexual, and dangerous. He took the blues, a black musical form, and mainlined it into white teenage culture. This was a revolutionary act. But then Elvis went into the army in 1958. When he came out, he was different. He was polished, he made movies in Hollywood, he sang ballads. The danger was gone. The raw edges had been sanded down. He became a safe, family-friendly entertainer. The rebellion was over. Just a few years later, the Rolling Stones emerged in London. And what were they doing? They were a group of young white men obsessed with American blues. They were covering songs by Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and Chuck Berry. Their sound was raw and aggressive. Their lead singer, Mick Jagger, moved on stage with a kind of androgynous, overtly sexual swagger. He pouted, he preened, he oozed a kind of defiant arrogance. Sound familiar? The Rolling Stones essentially picked up the torch that Elvis had dropped. They took the same ingredients, blues, rhythm, rebellion, and sex book. They pushed it further. Where Elvis's danger was hinted at, the Stones put it right in the lyrics with songs like I Can't Get No Satisfaction. Where Elvis's sexuality was a physical performance, Jagger's was both physical and lyrical. And Keith Richards, in his autobiography Life, talks endlessly about the purity of American blues and early rock and roll. He and the Stones saw themselves as evangelists for this music. They were taking it back to its roots, away from the polished pop that Elvis had come to represent. So the mystery isn't whether the Stones liked Elvis. They were all fans of his early work. The mystery is whether their entire bad boy persona was a conscious attempt to resurrect the dangerous, rebellious spirit of the original 1956 Elvis. Were they, in effect, trying to be more like Elvis than the actual Elvis of the 1960s was? They took his raw materials and stripped away all the Hollywood gloss. They were the Elvis that never went into the army, the Elvis that never made a movie in Hawaii. They were the version of Elvis that parents in the 1950s were actually afraid of. What are the unsolved questions here? Was the entire Beatles versus Stones narrative a false dichotomy, when the real story was the early Elvis versus the later Elvis, with the Stones championing the former? When Mick Jagger moves on stage, is he imitating a bluesman or is he imitating Elvis imitating a bluesman? And if Elvis had never cleaned up his act, if he had stayed the raw, snarling rebel of 1956, would the Rolling Stones have even needed to exist? Number 9 is Every Tragic Rock Star Story, just a rerun of Elvis's last act. We know the story, it's become a cliche. A young artist, full of talent and charisma, shoots to unimaginable fame. They have everything: money, adoration, power, but the pressure is too much. They become isolated, surrounded by enablers and yes men. They lose touch with reality. They turn to drugs and alcohol to cope with the emptiness. Their health fails. Their art suffers. They die young, a victim of their own success. From Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin to Kurt Cobain and Amy Winehouse, this tragic arc is a central myth of rock and roll. But did Elvis write the script? Elvis Presley was the first. He was the prototype for the modern global superstar. And there was no rulebook for how to handle that level of fame. When he became the most famous person in the world in 1956, the phenomenon was completely new. The Beatles would later experience it, but Elvis was the solo pioneer. He was a boy from a poor family who suddenly had unlimited wealth and was treated like a god. And he got lost in it. After his 1968 comeback, he became trapped in a routine of touring in Las Vegas shows. His life was rigidly controlled. He lived in a bubble. His inner circle, known as the Memphis Mafia, protected him from the outside world, but also insulated him from reality. He couldn't go to a store. He couldn't eat in a restaurant. He lived nocturnally, sleeping all day and staying up all night. This isolation, as described in books like Elvis, What Happened, written by 3 of his former bodyguards, created a profound loneliness. To deal with the physical pain from his demanding stage shows and the emotional pain of his isolated life, he turned to prescription drugs. A Dr. George Nicopolis, or Dr. Nick, prescribed him a staggering amount of painkillers, sedatives, and uppers. It wasn't illegal street drugs. It was a dependency enabled by the very people who were supposed to care for him. He became bloated, paranoid, and erratic. His performances in the final years were often sad and shambolic. He died at 42, a prisoner of his own fame. This story set a dark precedent. The isolation of the superstar, the circle of enablers, the reliance on substances to manage the pressure. The tragic, premature death. It's a pattern we've seen repeated with heartbreaking regularity. Michael Jackson, another child prodigy who became a global icon, lived an isolated life in his own Graceland, Neverland ranch. He also became dependent on prescription drugs supplied by a personal physician, leading to his early death. The parallels are chilling and direct. The mystery is how much of this is a direct influence versus a tragic side effect of a certain kind of mega fame that Elvis pioneered. Did future stars look at Elvis's life, consciously or unconsciously, and see a path to follow, both in its glory and its downfall? The rock and roll lifestyle of live fast, die young existed as a concept, but Elvis's story gave it a specific tragic narrative. It became the ultimate cautionary tale. So what are the things we still don't fully understand? Is the self-destructive rock star archetype a psychological inevitability of extreme fame, or is it a learned behavior, a script that was written by Elvis's final years? When a young artist today is surrounded by a large entourage, are they just following the modern celebrity playbook, or are they unknowingly recreating the Memphis Mafia? And the most haunting question, did Elvis's death create a twisted form of romantic mythos, making tragedy seem like an integral, almost necessary, part of a great artist's legend? Number 8, did Elvis's sexuality liberate female performers or trap them? And Elvis Presley, on stage in the 1950s, was a sexual earthquake. It's hard to overstate the impact he had. In a socially conservative era, he moved with a fluid, unrestrained, and overtly sexual energy. The way he curled his lip, the way he shook his legs, the way he held the microphone. It was a physical performance that was completely new to mainstream audiences. And the reaction from young women was explosive. They screamed, they cried. They fainted. It was a level of mass hysteria that had never been seen before. This was liberating in a powerful way. Elvis's performance gave young women an outlet, a public space where they could express feelings and desires that were otherwise suppressed. He was a symbol of rebellion against the buttoned-down conformity of their parents' generation. By screaming for Elvis, they were asserting their own desires, their own emerging sexuality. He didn't just sell records, he created a new kind of female fan culture. This energy surely had an influence on female performers. Before Elvis, most female singers were presented in a very controlled, non-threatening way. They were girl singers. Elvis showed that a performer could be raw, sexual, and dangerous, and still connect with a massive audience. Did this open a door for women to be more than just pretty voices? You can draw a line from the raw energy of Elvis to the blues-drenched, soul-bearing performances of Janis Joplin. You can see his rebellious sneer and the punk rock attitude of Chrissie Hynde of the Pretenders. This Madonna, the queen of controversial performance, built her entire career on challenging sexual norms, a path that Elvis helped to clear. He demonstrated that sexuality could be a powerful tool for a performer. But there's a darker side to this. The very thing that was liberating for the audience could have been a trap for performers. Elvis created a new expectation. A rock and roll performer was now supposed to be sexually charismatic. Did this create a new kind of pressure, especially for women? Suddenly, it wasn't enough to be a great singer or musician. You also had to be a sex symbol. The camera that panned up to avoid Elvis's hips was a form of censorship, but it also acknowledged the power of his sexuality. For female artists who came later, the camera was often focused intently on their bodies. The music industry has a long and sordid history of marketing female artists based on their looks and sex appeal, often at the expense of their music. Is it possible that the Elvis model of the charismatic, sexualized performer inadvertently reinforced the very objectification that women in the industry were fighting against? For every Janis Joplin who used that energy for her own artistic expression, how many female artists were pressured by record executives to be sexier to sell records? The mystery, then, is about the unintended consequences. Elvis's performance was an expression of his own authentic energy. But when that expression became a commercial formula, it could be used for very different ends. It became a marketing tool. And that tool could be used to empower, but it could also be used to exploit. So the questions that remain are profound. Did Elvis's revolution accidentally create a new kind of cage for the women who followed him, a cage built of sexual expectation? For every female artist he inspired to be more rebellious, how many did he inadvertently inspire the industry to package as a product? And is the ongoing struggle for female artists to be valued for their music over their appearance a battle against a paradigm that Elvis, the great liberator, unknowingly helped to create? Number 7. Did Elvis's escape from Nashville pave the way for modern country or leave it behind? Elvis Presley's musical identity was forged from 3 main elements: blues, gospel, and country. Before he was the king of rock and roll, he was a regular performer on the Louisiana Hayride, a popular country music radio show. His first recordings at Sun Records in Memphis were a blend of R&B and country. He covered songs by country legend Bill Monroe. He was, in the beginning, as much a country artist as anything else. In 1955, he was voted the year's most promising male country artist. He was part of the Nashville world. But then he exploded. Heartbreak Hotel became a massive pop hit. He was suddenly too big for any single genre. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, who had a background in country music promotion, guided him toward a more mainstream pop-oriented sound. He left the raw country blues hybrid of his son years behind for the more polished production of RCA in Nashville. But even there, he was making pop records, not country records. He recorded in Nashville with Nashville musicians like the brilliant guitarist Chet Atkins, but his music was aimed at the national pop charts. He had escaped the box of country music. This act of escape had a huge and deeply ambiguous influence on country music itself. On one hand, Elvis showed country artists that it was possible to cross over to a massive mainstream audience. He created a path. Before Elvis, country music was largely a regional phenomenon. He proved that a southern boy with a country sensibility could become the biggest star in the world. This idea of the crossover became a central theme in country music for decades to come. Artists from Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers in the 70s to Garth Brooks in the 90s and Taylor Swift in the 2000s all followed the trail that Elvis blazed. They blended country with pop to reach a wider audience. The entire genre of modern pop country is built on the foundation that Elvis laid. But on the other hand, did his departure hurt the genre? By becoming a pop star, Elvis effectively abandoned pure country music. This created a reaction. A movement within Nashville, known as the Outlaw Country Movement in the 1970s, was a direct rebellion against the slick, pop-influenced Nashville sound. Artists like Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and Johnny Cash wanted to take country music back to its raw, honest roots. They were rejecting the pop crossover model that Elvis had perfected. In a way, they were fighting against Elvis's shadow. So Elvis's influence is a paradox. He simultaneously created the blueprint for pop country and the rebellion against it. He opened the door for country artists to become global superstars, but in doing so, he may have diluted the very thing that made the genre unique. The countrypolitan sound of the 60s and 70s, which blended country with smooth pop orchestration, was an attempt by Nashville producers like Chet Atkins and Owen Bradley to find their own version of Elvis's crossover success, often with mixed results. As the mystery is whether his influence was ultimately good or bad for the genre. Did he show Nashville the path to commercial salvation, or did he set it on a course that would lead to a permanent identity crisis? The debate over what is real country and what is pop music in a cowboy hat continues to this day. And that entire debate arguably started the moment Elvis Presley left the Louisiana hayride for the Ed Sullivan Show. What are the questions we can't answer? When a modern country star like Morgan Wallen or Luke Combs uses hip-hop rhythms, are they following Elvis's example of genre blending, or are they proving that country music has lost its way? Did Elvis's success force Nashville to become more commercially minded, sacrificing its artistic soul in the process? And what would country music sound like today if the most promising male country artist of 1955 had never discovered rock and roll? Number 6 is Elvis, the unspoken ghost in the machine of hip-hop. On the surface, there seems to be no connection. Elvis Presley, the white rock and roll star from the 50s, and hip-hop, the black urban art form born in the Bronx in the 70s. In fact, Elvis is often seen as an antagonist in the hip-hop narrative. As Public Enemy's Chuck D famously rapped, Elvis was a straight-up racist. For many in the hip-hop community, Elvis represents the history of white artists profiting from black musical innovation. He is a symbol of cultural appropriation, the original sinner in a long history of musical theft. This perspective is essential and largely valid. The economic and social injustice of Elvis becoming a millionaire from a sound pioneered by struggling black artists is a foundational part of the story. But the influence might be more complicated and subterranean than just that. Elvis's story, if you strip away the specifics of rock and roll, is a story that has deep resonances with the core themes of hip-hop. Think about the archetypal hip-hop narrative. It's a story of rising from poverty to incredible wealth. It's about a young person from a forgotten part of America who uses their unique voice and style to become a global icon. It's about creating a larger-than-life persona, complete with a new name, flashy clothes, and a loyal crew. It's about celebrating success with cars, houses, and jewelry. It's a story of the outsider becoming the ultimate insider. This is the story of Jay-Z, it's the story of Dr. Dre, and it was first and foremost the story of Elvis Presley. Elvis was the original started from the bottom superstar. He grew up in public housing. He was a truck driver. He used his talent to achieve a level of wealth and fame that was unimaginable for someone of his background. He bought his mother a pink Cadillac. He bought Graceland. He wore custom jumpsuits that were the 1970s equivalent of designer clothes and heavy chains. His crew, the Memphis Mafia, was his posse. This narrative of aspirational wealth and loyalty to one's crew is a cornerstone of hip-hop culture. There are also musical echoes, however faint. Elvis's vocal style in the 50s was deeply rhythmic. He often used his voice as a percussive instrument. The way he played with phrasing and timing, a style he learned from blues and gospel singers, has parallels in the rhythmic spoken word delivery of rap. Sam Phillips's production at Sun Records, especially the use of slapback echo, created a unique sonic space around the voice. This focus on the sound and texture of the voice, making it the central, dominant element in the mix, is also fundamental to hip-hop production. Some hip-hop artists have acknowledged a more complex relationship with Elvis. The legendary producer Rick Rubin, who has worked with everyone from the Beastie Boys and Run DMC to Johnny Cash, is a massive Elvis fan. He sees a direct line in the rebellious, raw energy of early rock and roll and early hip-hop. Both were youth movements that terrified the establishment. Both were created by outsiders. Both were condemned as vulgar and dangerous. The mystery is whether this influence is a case of direct lineage or just a case of parallel evolution. Is it possible that the fundamental American dream story that Elvis embodied is so powerful that it independently re-emerged in the Bronx 40 years later? Or did the myth of Elvis, the poor boy who became king, seep into the culture so deeply that it became an unspoken, unacknowledged blueprint for a new generation of artists? So, what are the truly shocking questions? When a rapper boasts about their wealth and success, are they, in some small, unconscious way, channeling the same impulse that led Elvis to buy Graceland? Is the hip hop post a modern reinvention of the Memphis Mafia? And could it be that the figure most often condemned by hip hop is also, paradoxically, one of its ghostly, uncredited architects? Number 5, did punk rock try to destroy Elvis to save him? By the mid-1970s, rock and roll was in a sorry state. It had become bloated, self-indulgent, and corporate. The biggest bands played in massive stadiums, performed 20-minute drum solos, and released pretentious concept albums. And the ultimate symbol of this decay was Elvis Presley in Las Vegas. He was overweight, dripping in rhinestones, singing orchestrated versions of his old hits to tourists. He was everything that rock and roll was not supposed to be. He was safe, he was predictable. He was a corporation. Then came punk rock. In New York, at a grimy club called CBGB, bands like the Ramones were stripping rock music down to its absolute essentials. 3 chords, 2 minutes, no solos, no pretense. In London, the Sex Pistols were spitting anger and nihilism at the British establishment. Punk was a violent reaction against everything that mainstream rock had become. It was a declaration of war, and the King of Las Vegas was a primary target. But the relationship between punk and Elvis is a paradox. On the surface, the punks despised what Elvis had become. He represented the fat Elvis, the lazy superstar, but if you dig a little deeper, you find that many of these same punks revered the thin Elvis, the young, rebellious Elvis of the 1950s. That Elvis was their hero. He was the original punk. He was the one who had scared parents, challenged authority, and played raw, energetic, 3-chord rock and roll. To listen to The Clash, their cover of the rockabilly song Brand New Cadillac is pure supercharged Elvis energy. Joe Strummer's snarling vocal delivery owes a huge debt to early Elvis. The cover of their iconic 1979 album, London Calling, is a direct homage to the cover of Elvis Presley's 1956 debut album. The pink and green lettering, the font, the layout, it's a conscious tribute. The photo on the cover of bassist Paul Simonon smashing his bass is like an explosion of the raw energy that Elvis's original album cover only hinted at. The Ramones, with their leather jackets, jeans, and stripped-down sound, were a cartoon version of a 1950s rock and roll gang. They were tapping into the same youthful, rebellious energy that Elvis first unleashed. Sid Vicious of the Sex Pistols famously performed a sneering, chaotic version of the old pop song, My Way. But his entire persona, the curled lip, the vacant stare, the self-destructive nihilism was a dark mirror of the rock and roll rebel archetype that Elvis had created. So the mystery is, this was the entire punk movement an act of musical patricide. Were they trying to kill the bloated 1970s father figure of Elvis in order to resurrect the spirit of his younger, more dangerous self? It was as if they were saying, you, the real Elvis, have been corrupted and co-opted. You've forgotten what you were. We are here to remind you, and the world, by taking your original sound and your original attitude and pushing it to its absolute limit. Punk rock was a reset button for rock and roll. It was an attempt to get back to the beginning. And the beginning was Sun Records. The beginning was a 19-year-old kid in a Memphis studio full of raw talent and nervous energy, creating a sound that would change the world. The punk's relationship with Elvis wasn't one of simple hatred. It was a complex act of love and violence. They had to destroy the idol to get back to the man. What are the unsolved questions here? Is it possible that the most anti-establishment music movement of the 20th century was, at its core, a fundamentalist revival movement for Elvis Presley's original message? When a punk band plays a fast, simple, energetic song, are they rebelling against rock history, or are they the most faithful disciples of its first prophet? And did the punks succeed in saving Elvis from himself, even as he was dying in Graceland? Number 4, did David Bowie try to become Elvis from another planet? David Bowie was obsessed with Elvis Presley. It was a lifelong fascination that went far beyond simple admiration. Bowie was born on January 8th, the same birthday as Elvis. He saw this as a sign, a cosmic connection. Throughout his career, he made constant, often subtle references to the king. He wasn't just influenced by Elvis. At times, it seemed like he was trying to absorb his spirit to continue his story in a different dimension. The most obvious connection is in their vocal styles. In the early 70s, especially on the Ziggy Stardust album, Bowie often used a deep, dramatic vibrato that was a clear echo of Elvis's ballad style from his movie years. Listen to a song like Rock and Roll Suicide. The theatrical, emotional delivery is pure Elvis. Bowie's producer Tony Visconti has confirmed that during the recording sessions for the 1976 album, Station to Station, Bowie was listening to Elvis constantly. He was trying to capture some of that vocal power, but the influence goes much deeper than just the voice. It's about the entire concept of the rock star persona. Elvis was the first to show that a performer could be a kind of blank screen onto which the audience could project their fantasies. He was the poor boy, the rebel, the lover, the soldier, the movie star. He changed his identity throughout his career. But he took this idea and turned it into an art form. He wasn't just a musician, he was a series of characters. Ziggy Stardust, Aladdin Sane, the Thin White Duke, each one came with its own look, its own sound, its own mythology. This concept of the rock star as a fluid, constantly changing artistic creation is Bowie's great innovation. But the seed of it lies in Elvis's own multiple identities. The Ziggy Stardust character in particular seems like a sci-fi retelling of the Elvis story. Ziggy is an alien who comes to Earth and becomes a messianic rock star, only to be destroyed by his own success and the adoration of his fans. It's the Elvis tragedy played out on a cosmic scale. The '68 comeback special with Elvis in his black leather suit was a moment of powerful, almost superhuman reinvention. It's not hard to see that image reflected in the otherworldly androgynous glamour of Ziggy Stardust. Both were acts of creating a new, more powerful version of oneself. The connection continued to the very end of Bowie's life. His final album, Black Star, was released on his 69th birthday, January 8th, 2016. He died 2 days later. The album is a profound meditation on death and legacy. On the track Black Star, there is a lyric about a solitary candle. Some have interpreted this as a reference to Elvis, who, according to legend, was a black star in the sense that he was a white artist performing in a black musical style. In 2016, Tony Visconti confirmed that Elvis was very much on Bowie's mind during the making of the album. He said, "We were listening to a lot of Kendrick Lamar. We also listened to a lot of Elvis Presley. The idea of a final, definitive artistic statement released just before death is something that Elvis never got to do. His end was messy and undignified. It's possible that Bowie, in his own carefully planned death, was trying to give the Elvis story the artful, tragic ending it deserved. The mystery is about the depth of this obsession. Was it just a musical influence, or was it something more personal, almost spiritual? Was Bowie trying to correct the mistakes Elvis made? Was he trying to take the raw power that Elvis unleashed and channel it into a more self-aware, artistic direction? So, the questions that haunt this connection are these. Was David Bowie's entire career of shifting personas an elaborate attempt to do what Elvis did, but with more intellectual control? Is Ziggy Stardust not just a character, but Bowie's commentary on the Elvis myth? And in his final days, when he was making Black Star, was David Bowie thinking about his own death, or was he trying to finally complete the story of his hero, the boy from Tupelo, who was born on the very same day? Number 3, was Bob Dylan's entire career a rebellion against the Elvis archetype? Bob Dylan and Elvis Presley are often seen as two opposing poles of American music. And Elvis was the body. He was instinct, sex, and performance. He was the beautiful, iconic image. Dylan was the mind. He was words, ideas, and protest. He was the scruffy, intellectual poet. And Elvis sang other people's songs. Dylan wrote his own, and they were dense with literary and political meaning. They represent two completely different ideas of what a pop star could be. Dylan, of course, was a fan of early Elvis. He saw him on TV as a teenager in Minnesota, and it changed his life just as it did for so many others. He has spoken about the profound impact Elvis had on him, but as he developed as an artist, it seems he made a series of conscious choices that were the exact opposite of the path Elvis took. This is where the mystery lies. Was Dylan's career not just a different path, but a direct, deliberate rebellion against the model of stardom that Elvis created? Consider the image. Elvis was polished, handsome, and charismatic. He was a sex symbol. Bob Dylan, especially in his early career, was actively anti-image. He was often unkempt. He mumbled. He was famously difficult and confrontational in interviews. He refused to play the part of the charming pop star. While Elvis was smiling for the cameras in Hollywood, Dylan was on stage being booed for playing an electric guitar, challenging his audience's expectations. Consider the music. Elvis, after his initial burst of creativity, settled into a career of recording songs chosen for him by his record label and publishing company. He was an interpreter, a vocalist. Dylan, on the other hand, fought for and established the idea of the singer-songwriter as the dominant force in popular music. His artistic identity was completely tied to the words he wrote. He proved that what you had to say was more important than how beautiful your voice was. This was a direct challenge to the Elvis model, where the voice and the performance were everything. Consider their relationship with fame. Elvis became a prisoner of his fame, isolated in Graceland. Dylan has spent his entire career trying to escape it. He constantly changes his musical style. He disappears from the public eye for long periods. His never-ending tour, which has been going on for decades, is a life of constant motion, the opposite of Elvis's static residency in Las Vegas. Dylan seems to have looked at the trap that fame set for Elvis and decided he would never let it catch him. The critic A.J. Weberman famously dug through Dylan's garbage in the 1970s, trying to find the real Dylan. This act, however bizarre, points to a key difference. No one needed to dig through Elvis's garbage. His life, at least the public version of it, was an open book. He was the image. With Dylan, there has always been a separation between the person and the persona. He created a myth around himself that was about elusiveness and mystery, whereas Elvis's myth was about presence and spectacle. So, was this all a conscious strategy? Did the young Bob Zimmerman look at the career of Elvis Presley and map out a plan to be everything he wasn't? Did he see the power of the rock star archetype Elvis created, but also its profound dangers, and decide to build a new kind of stardom, one based on intellect, elusiveness, and artistic control? His career can be read as a point-by-point refutation of the Elvis story. The unanswered questions are fascinating. How much of Dylan's legendary contrarian nature was forged as a direct response to the perceived compliance of Elvis in his later career? Is the singer-songwriter movement of the 70s, which valued lyrical authenticity above all else, an indirect result of Dylan's successful rebellion against the Elvis model? And what would Bob Dylan's music sound like if he hadn't had the ghost of Elvis Presley to run away from for 60 years? Number 2 was the blueprint for Led Zeppelin hidden in Elvis's Sun sessions. Led Zeppelin is the archetypal heavy metal band. Their sound is defined by Jimmy Page's massive, distorted guitar riffs, John Bonham's thunderous drumming, and Robert Plant's soaring, banshee wail of a voice. They sang about Norse gods, fantasy worlds, and raw, blues-drenched lust. On the surface, their connection to Elvis seems to be mostly about Robert Plant. Plant idolized Elvis. He copied his vocal mannerisms, his swagger, his stage presence. He has said many times that he wanted to be Elvis, but this is usually seen as a superficial influence, a matter of style. The real mystery is musical. What if the fundamental sonic DNA of Led Zeppelin, the very blueprint for their heavy, aggressive sound, can be found in the earliest, most primitive recordings Elvis ever made? Let's go back to Sun Studio in Memphis, 1954 and 1955. Elvis, Scotty Moore on guitar, and Bill Black on stand-up bass. No drummer on the earliest tracks. Sam Phillips was the producer. The sound they created was raw, energetic, and full of space. Listen to a song like Baby Let's Play House. It's driven by a frantic acoustic rhythm, a simple aggressive bass line, and Scotty Moore's sharp, stinging electric guitar fills. But the most important element is Elvis's voice. It's wild, out of control. He shouts, he whispers, he hiccups, and behind it all is the famous slapback echo that Phillips perfected. It creates a huge cavernous sound. It makes this small group of musicians sound immense, like they are broadcasting from another dimension. Now, think about early Led Zeppelin. They were a band obsessed with American blues. They covered songs by blues artists that Elvis also loved, like Arthur Crudup. Their first album is full of raw, aggressive energy, but listen closer. The structure is often similar to those Sun recordings. It's built around a powerful central riff from Page, a driving bass line from John Paul Jones, and Plant's wild improvisational vocals floating over the top. The production on early Zeppelin records, especially the use of reverb and echo, creates a massive sense of space, making the band sound larger than life. Jimmy Page, as a producer, was a master of creating sonic landscapes. Was he, consciously or not, trying to recapture the gigantic otherworldly sound that Sam Phillips had created with just three musicians and a single tape machine in a tiny room? The connection is in the raw power and the sense of danger. The Sun Sessions were not polished. They were the sound of discovery, of something new and untamed being born. There are mistakes. The energy is on the verge of collapsing into chaos. This is the exact same feeling that permeates the best of Led Zeppelin's music. It feels both incredibly tight and dangerously loose at the same time. The solo in Heartbreak Hotel, Elvis's first RCA record, but still full of that Sun energy, is a burst of pure distorted noise. It's a moment of sonic violence that prefigures the kind of aggressive guitar sounds that Jimmy Page would later build an empire on. Robert Plant's vocal love for Elvis is the key that unlocks this deeper connection. He wasn't just imitating the snarl, he was channeling the wild, untamed spirit of those early recordings. He was taking the vocal freedom that Elvis pioneered and pushing it into a new, heavier context. So the truly unsolved mystery is not whether Plant liked Elvis. It's whether Jimmy Page, the architect of the Zeppelin sound, was secretly building his cathedral of heavy rock on the foundation of Sun Studio. What if the heaviest band of the 1970s owed its entire sonic philosophy to a handful of recordings made by a truck driver in 1954? Could a song like Whole Lotta Love exist without the raw energy of Baby, Let's Play House? And what does it say about the history of rock that the birth of heavy metal might be found not in a distorted guitar pedal, but in the ghostly echo of a single room in Memphis? Number one, did Elvis's decline accidentally create the Beatles' golden age? The influence of Elvis on the Beatles is the most famous story in rock and roll history. John Lennon said, "Before Elvis, there was nothing." Paul McCartney learned his first guitar chords trying to play Elvis songs. George Harrison was a devoted fan. Ringo Starr loved the energy. The early Beatles, in their leather jackets in Hamburg, were a direct product of the Elvis explosion. They covered his songs, they copied his attitude. Without Elvis, there are no Beatles. This much is clear, but what if the more powerful influence wasn't Elvis's rise, but his fall? The accepted narrative is that the Beatles picked up the torch from Elvis and carried it forward. But the story might be more complex. It's possible that the creative decline of Elvis in the early 1960s was the single most important factor in the Beatles' own creative evolution. It wasn't just an inspiration, it was a warning. In 1960, Elvis came out of the US Army. The world was waiting, and he delivered a series of great records like the Elvis Is Back album. But then something shifted. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, pushed him into a relentless schedule of making movies in Hollywood. The films were light, formulaic musicals. The soundtracks were, for the most part, terrible. Songs like Do the Clam and Yoga Is As Yoga Does. This was not the rebellious rock and roller who had changed the world. This was a safe family entertainer. His creative fire seemed to have gone out. He was no longer leading the culture, he was just a product. At this exact same time, the Beatles were exploding onto the world stage. They loved Elvis, but they were also hyper aware of what was happening to him. They saw their hero becoming a parody of himself, trapped in a golden cage. John Lennon in particular was vocal about his disappointment with the movie era Elvis. He felt that Elvis had sold out. In a 1965 interview, he famously said that Elvis died when he went in the army. This is where the great unknown lies. Did the Beatles look at Elvis's career path and make a conscious decision to do the exact opposite? After their initial burst of Beatlemania, they could have easily followed the Elvis model. They could have kept making simple pop songs and lighthearted movies like A Hard Day's Night. But they didn't. In 1966, they did something radical. They quit touring, they said they were tired of screaming crowds, and wanted to focus on making music in the studio. This was a direct rejection of the Elvis live performance model. Then they entered their golden age of creativity. Revolver, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The White Album, Abbey Road. They pushed the boundaries of what a pop song could be. They experimented with new sounds, new instruments, new lyrical ideas. They were in complete artistic control. They were growing, evolving, and taking their audience with them. All the things Elvis was not doing in the mid-60s while he was singing to a clam on a beach in a movie. Is it possible that every creative decision the Beatles made from 1966 onwards was, in some way, a reaction against the path Elvis had taken? They saw what happened when an artist gives up creative control to a manager in a movie studio. They saw what happened when you stopped taking risks. They saw the artistic death that came from repeating a successful formula. And they ran in the opposite direction. The failure of Elvis became their roadmap for success. His decline was the negative space that allowed their masterpiece to be created. This leads to some truly shocking and unanswerable questions. Would Sgt. Pepper exist if Elvis hadn't made Harum Scarum? Did the Beatles quit touring because they saw how the endless grind was destroying their hero? And the biggest mystery of all was the greatest creative run in the history of popular music, not just inspired by Elvis's genius, but a direct, terrified, and brilliant reaction to his tragic decline. Did the Beatles have to watch their hero die artistically so that they could live?